Let's talk about due diligence under the South Carolina state contract. Due diligence is a provision that allows the buyer to do some evaluation of the property before being locked into a contract. For example, the buyer could do inspections, inquire of anybody about anything about the property, and then determine whether he wants to proceed or whether he wants to terminate. The due diligence period begins on the effective date and ends on a date certain that's agreed upon by the buyer and seller in the contract. It ends at 6 p.m. on that date certain. Probably not a good idea to make it on a Saturday, Sunday, or holiday. It would be more difficult to conduct regular business on those days. And time is of the essence. So if for any reason the buyer thinks he wants to terminate but may not be able to do it by the date in the contract, then the buyer should seek an extension and get an agreed upon extension for the buyer and seller, because if he fails to terminate during that time period, then he buys as is, and that may be an unintended consequence that he doesn't want to do. Now, during this time period, if the buyer wants to ask for repairs, the buyer can ask for anything to be repaired. On the flip side of that, though, the seller doesn't have to make a single repair. The benefit to the seller, should the buyer terminate during the time period, properly terminate under this paragraph 8 of the contract and not any other paragraph of the contract, then the seller will get a termination fee. That termination fee is agreed upon up front by the buyer and seller, and it's also in the contract. But remember, this is only if the buyer terminates under paragraph 8, the due diligence paragraph. If for some reason another contingency is not met, i.e. financing in paragraph 7, appraisal in paragraph 10, termite in paragraph 11, sale of a home, any other contingency that is not fulfilled that requires that the buyer not to continue, would mean that the buyer could walk away and would not have to pay the termination fee. So if you're representing sellers, please don't tell that seller they're absolutely going to get a termination fee under paragraph 8 should the seller decide to walk away, because that's only true if the buyer walks away under paragraph 8. Now, during the due diligence period, the buyer can do whatever inspections if he or she wants to, doesn't have to do any inspections, but can make repair requests to the seller to see if the seller would like to make any repairs to keep the contract together. But if the seller says no, or just doesn't respond, not responding is a no, then the buyer would have to make a decision how to proceed. Then the buyer, of course, could then amend the contract, either based on repairs or something other thing, price reduction, any other provision of the contract that they would like to amend. Decide then to buy as is, or the seller can decide to terminate the contract and pay the termination fee and deliver the notice of termination. Both must be done within the due diligence period. Again, if the buyer's late or fails to terminate within the due diligence period, the buyer will buy as is.